All right, we now have our 2 coats of our base coat of Silk all-in-one mineral paint in the color Wharf on our countertop. So just to recap, we have cleaned, primed with 2 coats of Slick Stick, which is our bonding primer. We've waited overnight. We've done 2 coats of using our sponge, dapping on our silk paint, waiting a minimum of 2 hours in between each coat. So it's been 2 hours since our second coat of Wharf, and now we're gonna have some fun adding a second color and creating that cement-like finish. But before we do that, Bill is going to casually move the chairs out of the way.
Because we forgot to move the chairs.
We're trying to get pictures as we go along too, so. Okay, so remember after we put our base coat or our coat of primer on, we took our tack cloth and we wiped it off just to get any dust or anything that has fallen from the sky onto your countertop. You want to do that between every coat, because again, we have lights up here, we have cats. You just don't know what might fall on them.
For the amount of time that this takes, it's always a good thing to do. Remember, this is something you don't want to have to do over again. It's not like painting a picture frame where if you make a mistake, it's, oh, you can just redo it. You don't want to have to do that with large surfaces like this.
So what I was just doing there, there was just a little ball of paint. There's also one there. And I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of rub it off. If it doesn't come right off, guys, just leave it. With the texture that we're doing, you're not gonna see it, but at this point, if I pick it off, I may just create a big divot there. So I'm really not gonna worry too much about that one. If you're doing it in a solid color and that happens, you can just kind of rub it off after it's all dry, put a little more Slick Stick in there, and just kind of do the process over again in that spot. If you're using the sponge, you probably won't even notice it. If you're using a brush, you might notice a little bit in that spot. So just try to be careful getting those little paint crusties in there.
Reach for it.
So one thing that I did notice, I've used this sponge quite a lot, and I love these sponges. Pretty sure they're from Heirloom Traditions paint. I used it on the 2 smaller countertops over there. I used it for 2 coats here. And I actually used it on, I think, a desk and maybe something else that I painted months ago. So it does start to break down a little bit on the inside. And I noticed on my second coat, as the paint was building and kind of seeping through, it was drying in there. And I think that's what was creating some of the little speckles I was getting of dried paint. So just be mindful of that. It's kind of happening to this one a little bit too.
I think when you wash it out in between uses, you have to get in there real good.
Yeah. So
don't just wash the place where the paint's going to make contact with your surface. You got to wash the whole thing.
So the other thing is this is a little bit damp. Okay, because I just washed it a couple hours ago. Generally, you don't want to use much water with silk paint. Number 1, you don't need it. Number 2, it doesn't really play nice with a lot of water. If you're spraying silk paint, you can put some water in it to optimize it through your sprayer. But generally, just painting, you don't need a damp brush. You don't need a spray mister bottle of water or anything. So I'm going to use this one, which is just a little bit damp, with our white paint, because I'll be using probably a little bit less of that. And then I got my other one, which is totally dry. Okay, So we've used a fair amount of paint.
Did you wrap that in a paper towel to see if you could?
Yeah. So I had a little bit of paint left over, which is what I did the 2 smaller countertops with. And then when we started this countertop, we opened a brand new jar. These are the 16-ounce jars, and I got about a third left. So I used 2/3 paint on 2 coats. Generally, silk goes very, very far. I don't know if it's just the method that we're using, because it does kind of take a lot of paint to on your sponge. But we'll probably need another jar to do the rest of the counters. So I'm going to take what little I have in this old jar, and let's just use that up. So you're going to need 2 paper plates and 2 different sponges. You can also use like a big fat stencil brush. You know, anything that's got a flat surface. And I'm just kind of being careful because the edge of my jar is
Crusty.
kind of icky. All right, the color white that we're using is called white cap. Or no, I take it back. We're using saltwater. So it's not the brightest white in the silk line. I think that one is white cap. So this one is just, it's got a very, very small, probably hint of gray, but it's pretty white. It's pretty white. But when we put it against no, that was the primer. Never mind.
That was the primer.
The primer was like bright white. Yeah. So this is, if you're used to Dixie Belle paint, it's probably closer to fluff in the Dixie Belle paint line. So we're going to take some of this. Now we're not going to use as much of the white, because that's just going to be enough to kind of create that marbled look and blend in with the gray. So let's see. Try to get my thoughts together here, because we don't want to run out of paint. We want to make sure we can keep going. I think I'll leave this open. Okay, so in order for your white to kind of blend in, you're going to need to add some gray too, right? You kind of got to do a wet on wet, going back and forth, dapping until you get the look that you want. There's no, it's like a cement look, right? So it's not symmetrical. Get your OCD and all that like out the window, right? You want inconsistencies. Now you don't want to see a bunch of circles on there. So if you see where you're kind of going in a row and you're seeing a big pattern, just kind of go over that and just keep going back and forth with your colors. Do not overthink it. It's easy to do that. But what's nice about this pattern is it's inconsistent and it's easy. So we're going to, we're just going to start. Work in small sections. Make sure you get your edge. And we don't need to do as much as we did on the first 2 coats, because we already have our base coats down. So here's my white. And I'm just going to kind of, whoopsie. Going to kind of just dap it in until I kind of get the feel, you know, of how much I want on there. And then I'm going to go back with my gray. And that's kind of where I'm going to start working it. And you can see it's going to totally change the color of our base coat. If you find it's drying on you, and I'm pressing really hard, guys. I'm really trying to kind of get that white in there. I mean, yeah, so your sponges are going to start looking like each other in a little bit, so try to keep them straight if you can. But if you end up getting too heavy on the white or too heavy on the gray, just pull the other color in. Make sure you get your edges. Your arms will be very tired by the time you're done. but we're getting a little too white there, so we're gonna bring in a little more gray. And I see a lot of the circles, so very lightly, I'm going straight up and down. I'm trying not to get on the edge of my sponge. And I think I'm pretty good there. So let's keep going. And I'm kind of referencing back to the other section because I think that might be a little more gray, but that's why we did these in sections, because if we have a little bit different coloring, then you won't really notice it so much. And if there's a section that, when you're done, you don't really like, you can go back over it. So you don't necessarily have to get it right the first time, although that's the goal. And it's even kind of nice with the heavier white. I mean, if you want to go a little bit lighter, do it. And it's the reason we put those 2 base coats down. I could have done 1 coat, but if I miss some spots, you know, I don't want that coming through. I mean, I want the base coats to kind of conceal my mistakes, right? So if that bottom color comes through, that's okay, because I have a nice base coat under there, if that makes sense. I'm not sure I articulated that very well. And I think, so that's what's gonna, it's gonna happen.
Now you don't know which one is which.
It's gonna happen, but it's all right. Don't sweat it. We'll do a little bit more, and then we'll come back when it's done. So you can see I'm gonna have to pick up a little more gray here because it's getting pretty white. But I want to soften this up
Looks like
first.
we might need some white in these areas here. That's the spot.
And a lot of these circular kind of designs, they're gonna level out a bit, so you won't have like a bunch of circles. But if you see a lot of like repetitive patterns, that's probably where you want to.
Yeah, right here where you.
Yeah.
You haven't finished that area, but.
So that you can just kind of lightly. Do you see how they're disappearing? I'm not pressing real hard where the edges of the sponge are creating that circle. It's just kind of light. And you'll get the feel of it. You'll get the feel of it. And like, I kind of like that. I know it looks pretty white, but that cement is not, you know, it's not an even finish. And if at the end we look at that and go, oh no, then we just go over it. It's no big deal.
So why don't we stop here? We've kind of given everybody a good...
Yep. We can stop, but I'm going to keep going.
Yeah, she's going to keep going.
And we'll see you guys in about an hour. Bye, guys.